thought people might find it interesting to do a video on different kinds of filters and what sort of they connect to and everything. So we'll start off with 60mm filters. These are now obsolete. These were used on masks like the American M9 and the British light anti-gas respirator. After sort of, most of the Cold War, America then went to cheek filters during the Cold War, and then went to eventually 40mm NATO masks later on. Quite a few other countries used copies or clones of the M9, and then they used these sort of 60mm filters. This is a Finnish 60mm filter here. Most of these 60mm filters, as long as you don't get the American M9 original ones, are safe. Obviously be careful what type you do get and know what they are. But most of the countries that were using M9 copies, sort of up until the 90s and things like that, were using their own brand of filters that were perfectly safe. The issue is most of these are long since expired. So for them to work, you need to, if you had the mask, get a 60 to 40mm converter for the mask. But 60mm NATO filters were generally quite good. It's just that they were sort of size reduced, really only with the screw thread, to become 40mm NATO filters. Other than that, they're all pretty similar. So 60mm NATO, precursor to 40mm NATO, very good filter for when it was around. They just basically made them smaller for 40mm filters. Right, next we have pork chop filters or cheek filters. These are ones from my Czech M10, and they aren't brilliant filters. This one's the particulate one. As I've said before, I've been playing lots of times. Look, almost like it's bleeding around there. Assuming that's the glue they used. These aren't brilliant filters. Whether or not do these contain asbestos, I don't know on this particular model. The issue with cheek filters is, obviously, as I've said many times, these go in the cheeks of the gas mask. You only put them in from the inside, not the outside, so you can't change the filter if it expires when it's being used. They're a real pain in the arse to fit inside the masks because the areas the filters sit in tend to be smaller than the filters themselves, so it holds them in place. You have to kind of stretch it and shove it in. It's probably like giving birth in reverse, to be honest. And then once the filter's in there, it's just pain. Once you obviously have it in there, it's not too bad until it expires and you've got all the problems with them. As I said, these were basically invented for the American M17. There's a few different clones of the M17 that use these type of filters. The Russian PBF has EO19 filters, which are like round versions of these. As said, although the American original ones were safe, how safe the Warsaw Pact ones we are, don't know, and I imagine that the Soviet PBF EO19 filters probably did contain asbestos, or do contain asbestos, so these are the worst probably of all the filters on the list, just because of how much of a pain in the arse they are to actually, take in and out of masks and change them. So, next we have GOST filters, 40mm GOST. So what is this? So basically the Soviet filters, this is important to realise that both NATO and the Soviet Union had 40mm filters, 40mm being, the size of the screw. As in, reduced from 60mm to 40mm. However, the issue was, or is, lots of people don't seem to understand, is that Soviet GOST filters, 40mm GOST, are different than NATO 40mm STANAG, as in the screw there is different, which means that although they are the same size, they're not really compatible with each other. As far as I'm aware, if you screw a GOST filter in, not that you'd want to, into a NATO mask, it should make a pretty good seal. And I think that's because these threads are smaller on these masks than on the NATO STANAG filters. If you screw a STANAG filter into a GOST mask, so you have a GP5 and you want to put a NATO filter on it, you have to screw it really tight to get it in. That might damage the mask, and then it generally won't make an airtight seal because the threads are different. So if you basically put the mask on, go into a room, use a really strong smelling chemical, you should be able to always smell it through. You're not smelling it through the filter, you're smelling it through the gap that's left by the screw thread, if that makes sense. There's probably ways, as I've said before, that you can put rubber bands or some sort of epoxy around it and make an airtight seal, but really why bother? If you want a mask for actual practical use, just get any of the NATO masks or Israeli masks and then you know, just put your STANAG filters on to your heart's content. As we have said many times on this channel, pretty much all GOST filters are confirmed to have asbestos or suspected to have asbestos in, so do not use them. The only safe GOST filters I know of are the type I use when I test these masks, which is the Polish filters from after communism collapsed. They basically made ABE filters for a while that were made to a much higher standard. Before, as far as I'm aware, the current Polish filters, FP5s, are 40mm NATO threads, because Poland now uses 40mm NATO masks. But as a stopgap, they basically made higher quality GOST filters that didn't contain asbestos for a while. So, if you want to use a GOST filter that's safe, you either get the Polish ones from the 90s, before they went to their modern filter, or you get the modern Russian ones, and they're either ABE or ABEC. On my Facebook page I've got a link to somebody selling them, but as I said, I'm not going to babysit people and keep finding a link for them. If you search for them you will find them if you look hard enough. But as saying, the problem is, because there's less GOST filters around now, it's not a good idea to buy a GOST mask and want, you know, be able to get replaceable filters for it, because it's going to cost you a lot of money unless you are in some sort of Eastern European country where you can find them for cheap somehow. But as I said, these filters were fine at the time, but they did contain asbestos, so they're not really safe to use now. And you know, they came in all sorts of things, coffee cans like the GP5 one here, all sorts of sizes and shapes, but they all had the 40mm GOST screw. And now we have the best filter on the list. It's 40mm NATO. This is an Israeli one that's still sealed, and it's basically, you know, a filter made to a high standard, like this, but miniaturised slightly and with 40mm thread. And well, they're not always miniaturised. Some of them can even be bigger than 60mm ones, but they always have a 40mm top. And you know, these are great filters. Obviously, the quality can depend on the manufacturer and what type of filter it is, but for the most part, say if you get an Israeli one, very good particulate filter, P3 rating, you know, good impregnated activated charcoal layer at the top, pretty much stops anything, you know, an ABEC level CBRN filter. So, not much to say about this. Most NATO countries except America, and then America later, went to 40mm NATO sort of during the 1950s, 1960s, and these were, you know, really practical masks. Exact same thing really as a 60mm mask, just downsized to have a 40mm intake and 40mm filter. And for all accounts and purposes, you know, it works like the Russian one, just the ingredients are safer and you know what's in them really. So there you go. As I've said many times, if you are going to get a mask for survival reasons, unless you're getting an industrial mask, make sure you get a 40mm NATO compatible mask, because that's the easiest filters you can get. And as I said, if you have an old 60mm mask and it's got an airtight seal still, you can get cheaply 60 to 40mm converters at normally a couple of pounds on eBay. And then you can put these filters on those masks. For example, the Finnish M61s are still very comfortable and work. So if you got one of those converters rather than putting these on, you could put these on, and the mask would be a very practical, good mask. So there you go. That's our timeline of sort of modernish filters. I've not gone into like weird proprietary filters like Avon M50s have and Scott GSRs have, but this is just mostly, you know, the mainstream filters you might find in surplus shops and places like that, and what they fit onto and what they do.